Alright, these are the rest of the solutions for the Master Quiz 11 review. So this section you need to write a proof that the triangles are congruent. The way to do that is draw yourself a teacher, unless I need you put your conclusions. And on the right side you have your reasons or your proof for each of those things that you say. And you also need to label your triangle here. I'm just going to use A, B, C, and D, because I don't want to think of something new anyway. And then you start writing things down. So on this picture already, I know both of those angles are congruent. They have the same number of arcs. So that's angle BAC and DAC. So angle BAC congruent to angle DAC. And that's a given. It's right on the picture. So you can write given. I also have these two angles congruent to each other, and that's ABC and ADC. Angle ABC congruent to angle ADC. And that's a given. It's right on the picture. And then right here in the middle, I have a shared side between the two triangles. I can add a little congruent mark by saying AC is congruent to itself. And that's the reflexive property that lets you put that down. T. And now I have on my top triangle two angles in a row and then a side. That's angle, angle, side. And the bottom one, two angles in a row and a side. That's angle, angle, side. So these two triangles, which are ABC and ADC, those are congruent by angle, angle, side. So that's all that's happening on these ones. On 22, again, I need two columns. I need to label things. I'm going to do A, B, C, D. Already I know that these two sides are congruent because it's given it's right on the graph there. So AB is congruent to DC. That's given. And I know these two sides are congruent because they have the congruent markings in them. So that's AD congruent to BC. That's given. And I know right here in the middle, those two sides are, that side is congruent to itself. And that's the side BD congruent to BD. It's congruent to itself. That's the reflexive property. And now I have one triangle with sides outside, another triangle with sides outside. So I have two triangles with sides outside that are congruent. That's triangle ABD. And the next one, triangle. Make sure you're saying it in the same order. So I went along the 2, the 3, and the 1. And then you go along the 2, the 3, and the 1. So that's C, D, B. And that's my side, side, side. And that brings us to the next one. Again, two columns. Let's label things A, B, C, D, E, F. And start talking about congruence markings. So AC is congruent to FE because it's on the picture. And we can say, because it's on the picture, that's a given. And we also have these ones that have one congruence markings. That's BC and DE. That's a given. And then I have these two angles here, and that's right on the picture. They're both right angles, and so they have to be congruent. That's angle ACB is congruent to angle DEF. And that's given. It's right on the picture. So now we have two sides and the angle between them, two sides and the angle between them. That's going to give you side, angle, side. So the two triangles ACB congruent to angle triangle FED by side, angle, side. Remember, I'm along the 2 side first, so I had to follow that when I write the next one. So that one's side, angle, side. On 24, again, get yourself a couple columns. Let's label stuff. A, B, C, D. These two sides are congruent to each other. So that's AD and CD. and that's right on the picture, and that's a given. And I know these two sides are congruent to each other. That's AB and CB. Congruent to CB. And that's a given. It's right on the graph there. And right here in the middle, I can write congruence markings there because DB is congruent to itself, DB, by the reflexive property. And now I know both these triangles are congruent because they have side, 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 side for both. Triangle A, B, D, congruent to triangle C, B, D, by side, side, side. There's got a few left here. Number 25. Again, we need to label stuff, so I'm going to do A, B, C, D. There's no sides currently congruent, but I do have two angles. Angle there at B and the angle at D. That's ABD and CDB. So that's angle ABD congruent to angle CDB. And that's a given, it's right on the graph. And the other angles, the one with two arcs, are also congruent. That's ADB and CBD. DB congruent to angle CBD. That's a given, it's right on the graph. And I know this middle side, I can add a congruence mark, as in BD is congruent to itself because of the reflexive property. And now this left triangle has two angles and the side between it, and the other one has two angles and the side between it. They both have angle, side, angle. So I know triangle A, B, D is congruent to triangle C, D, B. And that's my angle, side, angle. That brings us to the next one. Again, get yourself a couple of columns there. We're going to have A, B, C, D, and I'll put E over here. And already on the graph, the picture, the shapes there, these two sides are congruent. That's EB and CD, AB and CB, not AB, EB and CB. Those are congruent. It's right on the graph, so I can say those are given. And then I have these two angles out here. That'd be angle A, congruent to angle D. And I can write just the one letter because it's the only angle at those points. Given. The only angle inside the triangles we're dealing with. And now there are two angles in the middle that are congruent. Because they're made from two lines intersecting, they're opposite each other. We can add a little double mark there. Those are congruent because they're vertical angles. And this time, when I write my angles, I have to write all three letters. I can do A, B, E, congruent to angle, and D, B, C. And that's because they're vertical angles. And now, on my triangle here, I have two angles and then a side that's not between them. And on the other one, two angles and a side that's not between them. I have angle, angle, side. And these two triangles are going to be congruent. ABE, congruent to triangle DBC. And moving on to the next one, again, let's, I'm going to put my columns over here. I'm going to have A, B, C, D, and already these two sides are congruent to each other. That's AD congruent to CD, and that's because those are given. And then I have two angles here that are congruent. You have a mark there, and since it makes a line, that one's also going to be congruent. So that's angle ADB, congruent to angle CDB. and that's given. It's just right on the picture there, given. And then I have this side here that I can add a congruence mark, because dB is congruent to itself. So dB congruent to itself. And that's by the reflexive property. It's a B. Property. And now, on the bottom triangle, I have side, angle, side. And on the top one, I have side, angle, side. I have the angle between those two sides. And so I have two congruent triangles. ADB, congruent to triangle CDB. And we can make it any more less legible. ADB. There we go. And finally, our last one, my two columns here on the right, A, B, C, D. Alright, so I already have some angle congruencies here. I have the angle down here and that one. And those are angles CAB and angle CAD. Those are congruent because it's right on the picture, so those are given. And I also have another pair of angles right there, centered at C. Those are angles ACB and angle ACD. That's given, it's right on the graph. And right here in the middle, I can add a tick mark for this side here, because AC is congruent to itself. And that's by the reflexive property. And now I have two angles in a row and the side between. So that's angle, side, angle for both. Two angles and the side between, two angles, side between. So we have triangle ACB and triangle ACD.